Right, so it looks like I'm going to have to branch out my video series on eugenics even further because I went over time in my last video. There were more things I wanted to include but didn't get the opportunity to. I should warn you, my phone is low on battery at the moment, so I might actually have to retake this or reshoot this later or branch it out even further. Anyway, in the previous video, I talked about how how society has basically been in decline over the past 2 centuries due to the rise in mutant genes, as was observed by Francis Galton and Benedict Morel and Charles Darwin. The proliferation of offspring, thanks to the rise in scientific innovations and the discovery of hygienic health practices, which led to the increased survival odds of newborn infants in the Victorian ages and in the modern era, basically meant that the selection pressures of natural selection were no longer as much of a threat to survival as they used to be. And I mentioned that this has led to a large, sizable number of people with, in some fashion, who have mutational load or mutant genes. I gave various examples of this. However, what I didn't cover over quite as effectively was intelligence. So first of all, let's get one thing straight from the get-go. Intelligence is highly heritable. Intelligence is basically the ability to solve cognitive problems. And a lot of people confound this issue by breaking it into different kinds of intelligence: verbal intelligence, emotional intelligence. Basically, all of these things have something in common. There is, in the study of psychology, intelligence is one of the most widely studied and observable traits. It is largely heritable. And we all understand on some level, like for instance, in the field of dog breeds, we all know that there are some dogs that are more intelligent than others. I think the border collies are said to be the most intelligent dogs. They are capable of understanding many different verbal commands. They're capable of performing tasks that require a lot of brain power and attention, like herding sheep. They are really smart dogs. I mean, I once saw a video of a dog, of a border collie saying the word hello over the air. It's really something. And conversely, many different dog breeds have different traits. There are some dogs that are more violent and more aggressive. For instance, pit bulls or Dobermans. I mean, recently our government made the decision to ban this particular dog breed called the American Bully XL, which was known to be a lot more violent and fierce and overrepresented in human fatalities, because some dogs are vicious and they're banned for a reason. Now, when it comes to breeds of dogs, we don't play around with any nonsense that it's all to do with nurture, it's all to do with nurture and how the dogs were raised or anything like that. We understand that some dogs are dangerous, and we understand that some dogs are just smarter and more suited to family life than others. Yet strangely, we don't adopt this approach when it comes to humans. We don't think that there are some humans born with innate characteristics that make them more functional and more capable of performing well in society. Intelligence is one such measure by which we gauge a person's ability to perform in society, because obviously IQ tests did not exist before the 19th century, right? But that doesn't mean we can't use research, we can't use empirical data to determine that there were smarter people and less smart people before then. There were various social proxies we can use to gauge somewhat average intelligence back then. One example is social status. In fact, social status may well present as the single most compelling indicator of one's intelligence, because there's a very strong correlation that exists between one's social status and one's intelligence. Basically, intelligence is a necessary requirement. If you want to rise to the top of society, you've got to have a big brain that's capable of solving multiple cognitive problems. You've got to understand the mores, the rules of how to function and how to thrive in a society. And if you're not that smart, you're not going to do so well. You might be a bit awkward or a bit gauche, or you might end up being a criminal. And there is, by the way, again, I sound like a bigot when I say this, but it's true regardless. I don't care what you think. It's the truth, and I'm going to preach the truth on this channel, how I see the world and all that. Yes, there is a correlation between criminality and low IQ. And on some level, I think we all know this deep down. And up until the 19th selection, human evolution itself was filtering out these people. These people were, if they weren't being killed off before birth, they were being executed in very large numbers. There's one particular scientist, I think by the name of Heidegger, who actually wrote about this, how from the 12th century to the 17th century, we killed off so many violent criminals by executing them. The amount of people we culled off was so ridiculous, we basically altered our gene pool over time. In fact, there was one particular video by an American YouTuber called The European Revolution. The guy in question, his name is The Alternative Hypothesis, or Ryan Falk. He can describe this in a much more authoritative manner than I can. But basically, yes, there were these various selection pressures in place that existed up until the 18th century, where we were getting rid of all the low IQ, all the genetically inferior types, people who were likely to have mental illness, people who are low in trust, low in intelligence, and the upper echelons of society, the smarter people, the most intelligent, who in the 17th century, examples of the more intelligent members of society would have included members of the clergy, because back before the 18th century, the church was basically the ruling elite among the society. The learned scholars would live in monasteries, or they would become preachers or ministers, or they'd work in the government. They would have formal titles to their names. They would be members of the aristocracy. Now, the correlation between being a member of the ruling class and being intelligent is not 100%. There are some really thick people, and there always have been some really dumb people in positions of government and whatsoever. So it's not 100%, but it's still an undeniable correlation. It's if you take an average member of the British royal family or the House of Lords and compare it to an average person from, from Essex or one of the outer London boroughs, you will find that more often than not, there is a substantial difference in intelligence and IQ. Basically, 1 or 2 different standard deviations. Now, as this relates to in relation to what I was arguing in my last video, this eugenic natural selection process, which was selecting for intelligence, religiosity, and sober-mindedness, began to break down with the advent of the Industrial Revolution, and then the reversal began to happen, because around this time something rather peculiar started happening. The ruling members of society, the most intelligent people at the time, started having lesser and less children. And conversely, the people from what Galton and Morel argued, and Darwin too, argued was the lowborn, the riffraff, the common people, or the people who are mentally unstable, or the criminal underclass, were having more and more children. So this has led to an increasingly large criminal underclass, think about girls who get pregnant before the age of 16 because they don't know how to use contraception, or boys that just can't work out how to use a condom. Most people are smart enough, not to make dumb mistakes like that, but there are people like that. In fact, has anybody seen that classic Mike Judge comedy called Idiocracy? if you haven't seen it, I do recommend you give it a watch, because it's really funny. It's one of the funniest movies I ever saw, but it is based on a layer of truth. It is based on a kernel of truth. It touches on this idea. It's set in a dystopian theoretical future in which America has become a country full of massive idiots, all because of this dysgenic evolutionary selection process. It was released in, I think it was released in 2004. I don't remember exactly what year, but, well, if you watch that movie, I think you'll come round to my way of thinking a lot easier, because I am not, people like Ed Dutton and myself and all those other eugenic writers, we're not the only ones to have made this observation. Like, there is a noticeable trend where there's the people, the people even in our government are getting less and less intelligent. Off the top of my head, some of the people in our government right now are really thick. Let me give you an example. Angela Rayner. I mean, she's not exactly very bright. Or what about David Lammy? David Lammy, have you seen how thick as shit that guy is? There's this viral clip on YouTube of him standing in front of a TV news camera saying, "I've lived here all my life and I've never seen a police officer." And there's literally a policeman standing in the background behind him. And who thought it was a good idea to let him be our foreign minister? We live under a moron-occupied government, I swear. But anyway, that's another thing I wanted to point out, and it relates to what I was saying in the first part, in the early part of my second video in the eugenics series, where I talk about how our government is just dumb. Really, really, really dumb, pretending to care about climate change, but actually importing coal and oil from America and not taking any natural gas reserves from Russia because of Ukraine and all that, in spite of the fact that we got to be net zero by 2050, not choosing to invest in nuclear energy, which would help extricate our entire energy needs from fossil fuels anyway. Like, why wouldn't we do that? And not getting out the magic money printer and just money. Like, intelligent people wouldn't make these mistakes, okay? Really smart people, you think the Victorian ruling class would have made these idiotic mistakes? Because I guarantee you, by every conceivable metric, there are various studies that have borne this out in terms of things like color discrimination, usage of multisyllabic words, reaction times. All the evidence has been shown that the average person from the Victorian era compared to nowadays was basically one standard deviation worth of intelligence higher than us. Intelligence has been declining by roughly 3 points per generation. You can look this up on Google and you will find plenty of articles that point this out. And well, if you're really curious, I recommend you look at The Jolly Heretic on his YouTube channel, because he's the one who kind of inspired me to make this video series, and he's the one who led me in this particular direction. Now, I want to end off this video series by saying, if I had my way, right? If I was the God Emperor of the entire world, and I wanted to make the world a better place, what kind of things would I do? Obviously, I would implement some form of eugenic policy, but who would be allowed to breed and who would not be allowed to breed? Now, obviously, it's one thing to propose an idea. It's one thing to make an observation that the less well-suited to survival and flourish, you know, the lower orders of society, let's call it that, should have less children, while the people with greater potential should have more children. But to actually say that to another person, especially if they want to have children, you know, obviously I don't think I would have the stomach to implement a policy like that. And you've got to understand, if you're watching this video series and you feel personally attacked by what I've said, you know, maybe you think, like, how dare you? You're saying that I shouldn't be allowed to have children? Like, what are you, a fascist? and incidentally, this did actually happen a couple of years ago. There was one friend, a former friend on Discord, who I used to chat and joke around with, who told me how he came from a country where they used to have eugenic policies, and I said, and I didn't really know what his position was, so I said, yeah, I think that's a good thing. And then he was completely, totally alarmed and taken aback by what I said. I calmly and lucidly explained what my position on eugenics was, and I think he felt so outraged and so personally attacked by what I said that he said, I can't be friends with you anymore. So that kind of thing, it's happened to me before, but all I can say is, my views are my views, right? If you feel personally attacked by my views, you're welcome to disagree, but like, how you come to terms with your existence in a world and how you handle the facts which I presented before you, really, that is your choice. And whether you should have children or not, in a way, it's not really down to me. That's more of a thing that's down to you, because I don't have the power to prevent people from having children. But you got to be honest and look at yourself in the mirror. You got to look at your life and thinking, is my life good right now? Am I content with the way things are? And if I have children, are they going to be content too? Based on the life that I've lived, do I have reason to believe that my children are going to live the same life? Are they going to have a better chance at succeeding than I am? If the answer is no, then you really ought to think twice about having children. So that's something you've got to introspect and think about. But, well, I went off on a bit of a tangent there. But anyway, let's say I had the authority to make blanket decisions on who should and who shouldn't be allowed to have children, right? Well, I wouldn't go out and castrate or sterilize people just like that. It would be cold, it would be inhuman, and it would be authoritarian. And I don't think any group of people would want to live under a dictatorship like that. The only people who I would castrate and sterilize would be basically low IQ criminal scum. And don't get me misunderstood here. I'm not just talking about poor people in general. I mean sociopaths. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but have you noticed how much litter, how much rubbish there is on the side of the road? And have you ever taken a moment to think, who does that? Who tosses cans of Monster or Red Bull and single-use plastic bags on the side of the road? I'm not talking about apples or biodegradable foods. I mean rubbish that will still be around thousands of years before that. You got to understand, not everyone does that. It's a small minority of people, but the damage that they do to this country is so vast, and we aren't punishing them enough. So basically, my running theory, my hypothesis, this small number of people who keep doing this are the low IQ sociopaths, criminal scum, riffraff, the absolute dregs of society, the people who just, God, their very existence is an inconvenience to everyone. Like, if we stopped them from breeding, the world would be an immeasurably better place, and nobody would miss them. Now, these people are rare, but honestly, fly tipper. Yeah, sorry about that. My phone ran out of battery power. So anyway, picking up from where we were left off, I was talking about what kinds of people should be sterilized. Well, obviously, people who litter on the side of the road. So what kind of people litter on the side of the road? It's not most people who do that. It's the antisocial types. People who are low in IQ, people who have criminal tendencies, and who in general just don't give a fuck about what society expects from them, or what anybody expects from them, from that matter. I think we can all collectively agree the world would be a better place if we stopped those people from breeding. Because these people, not only do they not contribute anything to society, if anything, they come at a cost to society, a cost that doesn't warrant anything. All our taxpayer money is being funded to making sure these people get 3 square meals a day in prison, to make sure that they attend these remedial reading classes and these courses, which are all wasted on them. It's like casting pearls before swine. We're trying to make something of these people, but we'll never make anything out of them, because these people are not, they're just... trying to think of the kindest, most advertiser-friendly way to put this. Look, they won't amount to anything. And if it sounds like I'm being contemptuous, look, I'm not talking about... I wouldn't be so vindictive towards these people were it not for the fact that they are harming the environment, and they're polluting the air around them just by existing. If you've ever encountered one in the street, they probably mugged you and asked for your phone, or tried to sell you drugs or things like that. You can't hate them enough. The very fact that we tolerate them is proof that our society is breaking down. In some cases, we let them squat in houses. We let them take advantage of our public services, and they're probably the reason why our public services are so overburdened and encumbered and overcrowded in the first place, because all they do is take and never give. So those are the first people who I would order to undergo eugenics. And who else is there? Well, people with hereditary genetic abnormalities, people with genetic disorders, like people with traces of schizophrenia, Huntington's disease, cystic fibrosis, sickle cell anemia, or other things that are life-threatening, and or neurodegenerative disorders like Alzheimer's. Now, I've got a personal friend and a family friend and a neighbor whose dad is suffering from late-stage Alzheimer's. And honestly, even speaking as somebody who lost his father to cancer, now that was painful enough, I thank my lucky star. Compared to him, in his situation, I had it easy. Losing, this guy's father is still alive, but the stuff that he goes through, the stuff that he, my friend, has to deal with in caring after him, it's humiliating and painful in a way that dealing with somebody dying of cancer isn't. Because with cancer, obviously your body is breaking down and in serious peril, but at least your mind, for the most part, I mean, my dad's, at least up until his final moments, is mostly intact. But if you've got Alzheimer's, you lose that too. All the cliches that you associate with Alzheimer's. I mean, his father literally forgets who he is. He forgets where he is at all times. He needs to have this monitor, this tracking monitor on him at all times, because sometimes he wanders off and goes walking places and he forgets where he is. So he's forgotten his own son's face and his name, and he keeps confusing him. He gets irritated and irritable quite easily. He breaks into conversations where he does that thing where he has these delusions and he rambles on, and his conversations don't have any kind of coherent structure or logical flow to any of them. And it's really heartbreaking to hear somebody. In fact, this had such a profound effect on him. It had such a damaging effect on my friend that he's already decided he doesn't want to bring children into the world. He's way more of an antinatalist than I am. Even though he's younger than me, he's decided he can't go through the pain of bringing a child into the world after seeing that. Because what that experience, the experience of him caring after a father with Alzheimer's, what that's done is it's had a paternalizing effect on him. Basically, he's already lived through the experience of caring after his father in the same way that he would have to care after a child if he became a father. So he's already lived through it, and he doesn't want to do it again. He just wants to live out the rest of his days But even worse, at some point, he might experience Alzheimer's, and he's going to have to relive the pain and the agony that his dad did. And reminds me, I need to have a drink with that guy, and we need to talk more, because there's so much going on in his life, and I'm one of the few people who he confides in to trust this information with. But yeah, now if you know anyone in your family who's going through dementia or Alzheimer's, it is hell. And I would definitely I definitely mark that out for sterilization and eugenics, because if you don't think Alzheimer's is a trait that needs to be eliminated from our gene pool, then you've never been in a position of dealing with someone who has it. So there is that. And who else should not be allowed to breed? Okay, now this is probably going to rub a lot of people the wrong way. This is going to spark some controversy, but all women aged 36 or older, or all women aged 40 or over. So if you've ever read up on research as to children who are born to parents of advanced maternal age, there's a very significant fertility window in all women. The ideal age for a woman to have children is, I think, her late teens and early 20s to her late 20s. Past that, it starts to get more difficult. The odds of having a miscarriage or a stillborn child start to increase with age. But it's not just that. The odds that you give birth to a baby with some kind of chromosomal abnormality, like Klinefelter syndrome or Down syndrome or Fragile X syndrome, those start to increase. Like a 20-year-old woman, the odds of a 20-year-old woman having a baby with Down syndrome are something like 1 in 1,816, something like that. But by the time the woman is 35, those odds have increased to something like 1 in 300, and then by the age 40, it's something like 1 in 35. Now, those odds might not be exactly correct. I might need to refresh my memory and take a look at the statistics. But basically, the odds of giving birth to a baby who is deformed or who is genetically sick increases with age. Now, I don't care if you're a woman watching this who is in her mid to late 30s and who really wants to have children. You might want to experience the joy and the pleasure of giving birth to a child in this world. Now, as I am not someone who considers himself a full dyed-in-the-wool antinatalist, and there have been times where I've wanted to experience the joy of being a parent, so I do partly sympathize and understand that. However, you got to look at things from the big picture. You got to broaden your perspective a little. Think about what your child would have to go through. Would your child be thankful if you birthed him into this world to live an imperfect or mediocre existence, where he would basically think about the story I told with my family relative with extreme level 3 ASD? Trust me when I say you do not want to bring a child like that into the world. And also, everyone else who has to deal with that child will think the same way. You seriously got to think about these things and take it into consideration, because well, I know it gets lonely. I know we all, not all of us, obviously, but it is understandable that one would want to experience the joy of being a parent in ideal circumstances, all things being equal. But you have to consider that things don't always turn out the way you expect them to. And you ignore and disregard the rules of nature, the laws of nature, at your own peril. So that's why I would consider eugenic policies for women past a certain age, and also for men past a certain age too. So there's a lot of debate has gone into the causes of autism and ADHD. There have been various different theories that have been proposed. For instance, in the 90s, there was the Wakefield scandal, where the Wakefield debacle, where Andrew Wakefield put out a paper in which he believed that was causing an increased prevalence in autism among babies born of that era. I'd just been born around this time, so this was something that my mum and dad, I did get the ethnician. However, I've said before, I am unconvinced by this theory. I do not believe in the is responsible for the increasing prevalence of autism because I've looked at the study, I read it, and I think the study also said that also triggered gastrointestinal problems, gastroenteritis as well. And I never had any history of that. I've looked at my medical history, and even though I took the and even though I do have some form of autism, I never experienced any gastrointestinal problems as a young child. And also, I think it's a cop-out. I think that's too convenient an explanation. I don't think it explains everything. I mean, it would be a very convenient explanation if it were true, because well, the solution would be simple. We don't give out the however, nothing in life is ever that simple. However, there's another theory that's gaining traction on what causes autism, and that is genetic mutation. And it's believed, it has been proposed by researchers like, I think by Simon Baron-Cohen, that the older that your father is when he conceives with the egg in the womb, the greater the likelihood that he will have a child with autism. So this is what I was referring to earlier, advanced paternal age. I think there are studies that have shown that once the father gets past a certain age, like 40, almost definitely 50 or 60, you're more likely to give birth to a child who is fucked in the head. If you think that's frightening, though, if you think that's bad, I've also come across studies, I've also heard from the Jolly Heretic, incidentally, that pedophiles, people who are attracted to children, the evidence seems to suggest that they were born to parents of advanced paternal age. Now think about that. Do you want to give birth to a child who might be a nonce, a kiddie diddler? I think I speak for everyone when I say, fuck no. I don't even want to bring a child into the world who has autism, let alone a kiddie diddler. I'm probably going to have to censor parts of this video in case YouTube takes it down. I've already said more than enough to get demonetized. So, those are more or less the things I would do. Also, you got to understand, if I sound like an elitist, if I sound like, if you've ever seen that Mitchell and Webb look sketch where the guy says, "Have you tried Kill All the Poor?" Well, that's not really what I'm all about. You know, I don't think that we should just make all the poor people unable to breathe, because I live around a lot of poor people. I mean, I come from honestly, my family, we're kind of dirt poor right now. We can barely afford the mortgage on our house. I mean, we're not the poorest family in the UK, but I've lived through relative poverty. I've certainly had it better than other people. I'm privileged in comparison to many others, but I don't take this view that we should just, well, to put it more simply, I think we should create some sort of government incentive where the well-to-do, the more financially well-off, and the more intelligent should be encouraged to have more children, whereas everyone else should be encouraged to have less. Now, make of that policy if you will. If you think that that's elitist, if you think that's Darwinian, basically, in the long run, this would lead to a society that is more intelligent and more functional. The children born into a world like this, they would not, in my view, they would have less of a reason to despair, because the social mechanisms would be run by competent people, and society would espouse a healthy, outward-looking philosophy that would, at the civilization, it would have a sensible ethos that would inspire hope and optimism in everyone who was blessed enough to be born into it, even if those people came from a poor family. So that's why I believe eugenics could help to create this, maybe not a perfect society, but a better one. Certainly better than the one we live in now. Because you got to understand, perspective is pretty important. Like, you might think, one little thought experiment. Do you think you would be happy if you were born into Victorian Britain? I mean, from the outside looking in, there were lots of terrible things that going on in that time. Lots of people dying of cholera, typhus, diseases were rampant. Class prejudice was pretty virulent back then, and there were lots of, there was no kind of welfare safety net back then. But but honestly, supposing you had the time machine and the means to travel back in time and speak to people back then, how would you be able to gauge whether they regretted being born in that time period? I mean, the ideas of things like antinatalism probably never would have even appeared into those people's heads, because their perception of reality is different. People were a lot more religious back then. People were big believers in God. And religiosity, believing in God, is inversely correlated with depression and mental illnesses. It's no coincidence, by the way, the vast majority of antinatalists are also atheists. They don't believe in God. Well, they have no reason to believe in God, probably because they've never seen, felt, or heard his presence, but also they take a look at the world around them, they reflect on their miserable life experiences, and the natural corollary is that life is essentially meaningless. They were born basically by a series of chemical accidents into a world that couldn't care less whether they lived or died, and they couldn't make any noticeable or meaningful impact on it. It's totally understandable why antinatalism and atheism are correlated. There might even be a causal relationship between the two. However, it doesn't necessarily mean that we can't implement policies that could change this outlook in life. As I've said, the reason why antinatalism is becoming increasingly prevalent in society is because the world we live in now, especially modern civilization, is fucking shit. It's no wonder would anyone want to bring a child into the world the way it is now. It's not just the economy that is wrecked. Everything is fucked. If you don't believe me, there's one video by Whatifalthist. God, I can't remember exactly what it's called. It's something like A Day in the Life of Generation Z. There's this 40 or 50 minute video where he talks about all the struggles of Generation Z in this modern world. The moment I remember what it's called, I'll link it in the description. But yeah, no. We have it pretty bad nowadays. So obviously, we're living under environmental stressors that would lean people in the direction of antinatalism, which is understandable. However, we might be able to change that with the help of science, and with a more nuanced and more responsible attitude towards the study of genetics. Also, on the positive note, we might not even need to implement eugenics. We might not even need to deal with the heartbreak of destroying unborn children. The day might come in the future where we might have the technology and the know-how and the expertise to sequence and isolate alleles and genes that are responsible for causing defects, like illnesses, like chromosomal abnormalities. And we could get rid of them, or we could change them. And then we could end up giving birth to healthy children. And think about the good that would do. I think that would also technically count as eugenics. I once attended a conference on this many months ago in January. I don't want to give too much information about it because, well, it was a bit of a secretive event. But I did have the pleasure of meeting up with Ed Dutton, the Jolly Heretic, there. And we had a series of conferences and talks from people who are advocates of eugenics and other practices and advancements in eugenic science and the study of genetics that could help steer society in a more favorable direction. It could end the existential malaise. Now, lastly, I want to end this video by saying, why do I feel so strongly, why do I feel so compelled to make this argument? Like, considering my stance on eugenics, my life isn't perfect the way it is now. I'm going to make a video about Asperger's or autism later and my personal experience with it. And if you're watching this video and you feel like a lot of the things I've talked about apply directly towards you, and you might feel like you might feel personally attacked by these series of videos, like I'm basically advocating that you shouldn't have children. Well, first of all, the matter of whether you should or shouldn't have children, that's a decision only you and you alone can make. But why do I feel this way? Well, it gives me hope. Because honestly, I'm not really that happy with my life. The reason I'm not happy is because there are these things, these little tics about my brain, about my personality. There are these character traits I either inherited or which somehow I seem to have inherited by chance, which I can't really do much about. Like, I tend to lose control. I tend to get overwhelmed incredibly easily. I don't know why. I don't always act rationally in certain situations when I know what I should do, what I could do in order to improve my life situation. I know that if I just knuckle down, if I work hard, if I concentrate on looking forward and thinking ahead and planning towards the future, and if I had the mental fortitude to take everything in stride, to not take things personally, to not take other people seriously, I get so much more out of life. But I can't do that. And the reasons I can't do that is because of factors that were in place before I was even born into this world. But if I existed with the means, if we lived in a world where we could control things like that, prevent it from happening, and if I had the means to implement to utilize those means to give birth to children who did not have to grow up with the same struggles that I did, well, that gives me hope. It means I don't have to create miniature versions of myself who would have the same existential dread, the same malaise, about modern life that I do. So that is why I am a passionate advocate for eugenics. That is why I believe eugenics can save our civilization. It can serve as an antidote to antinatalism. It can make people happier, because life is suffering, right? Make no bones about that. Life has never been positive, but it's how you deal with it. Some people can deal with it. Some people have got the right tools, the right mindset, the right mentality, and the right skills, and the right intelligence to roll with the punches and come out on top as a winner. I'm not one of those people, but if I believe that we can foster a world where more of those people exist, and that's the kind of future I want to live in, that's the kind of future that I would want for my children. So, this has been the final video in my in my 3-part video series on eugenics. You are welcome to disagree with my opinions if you like, as long as you're respectful, you know, as long as you give out your objections in a calm, clear, and concise manner. That's totally fine. If you're just going to come out with personal attacks like you're a Nazi, you're a fascist, whatever. Like, this is my channel. I'll make the content that I want. I'm not making this content for an audience. I'm making this content as basically a video diary. And if people tag along and provide their own input, and if I start to cultivate a small following, well, that's pretty good. But I don't care, man. Anyway, all right. That's all I've got to say. God, I'm starving now. I got to head home and grab something to eat. I'll see you guys later.